They said Banin never sleeps, but that night the city seemed to hold its breath, as though it knew two lives were about to collide. At 2:07 a.m., under sheets of unforgiving rain, a woman stood with her sick child pressed to her chest, her dignity the only shield between them and despair. Across the flooded street, a silver Maybach slowed to a halt, its engine whispering a story of privilege. From its backseat stepped Ademide Akanji, heir to a billion-naira empire, a man raised in glass towers but restless in his own skin. For reasons even he couldn't explain, he stopped, not for business, not for duty, but for a stranger. What neither of them knew was this: the night had drawn a line between wealth and want, pride and need, secrecy and truth. And once that line was crossed, neither life would remain untouched. The rain pressed harder, pinning the night into a haze of silver lines. On the service lane near Oshodi Interchange, the Maybach idled, its headlights bending puddles into shards of light. The gala Ademide had abandoned hours ago. Champagne, rehearsed laughter, deals whispered in corners, already felt like a lie he had lived too long. Out here, in the raw air of the city, at least the silence was honest. And that was when he saw her. Under a kiosk's crooked zinc roof, she stood as if carved from resolve, her clothes clinging, her hair braided back but unraveling at the edges. She held her son, Chisholm, no older than 6, tied against her hip. The boy's cough sliced through the hum of generators, a brittle, rasping sound that carried a mother's worst fear. She rubbed his back in slow circles, whispering words only he could hear, but her eyes were sharp and restless, measuring the night as though it were an enemy. Ademide stepped forward, careful with his tone. "Madam," he called over the storm, his voice steady but low, "you shouldn't be out here at this hour. Banin is not safe after midnight." She turned, startled, her face wet from rain, her gaze colliding with his. Ifunanya. Though he didn't know her name yet, he could see the battle in her eyes, exhaustion dragging her down, pride keeping her upright. "We'll be fine," she said flatly, clutching her son tighter. "I don't need your pity." Her voice was iron, unbending. Ademide took another cautious step, hands visible, respectful. The cufflinks on his wrist glinted beneath the streetlight, betraying wealth he wasn't ready to name. "I'm not offering pity," he said. "I'm offering a ride. Somewhere dry. Somewhere safe." She shook her head, water flying from her braids. "Safe? In a stranger's car? No, thank you." The boy coughed again, his small chest struggling, and for the first time her mask cracked. Her lips pressed into a thin line, fear trembling underneath the pride. Ademide softened his voice. "What happened?" "My bag was taken. Phone gone. We waited for the rain to stop, but it hasn't. And she faltered, pressing her hand to Chisholm's damp curls, "he needs rest." The silence between them grew heavy, filled only by the hammering rain. She finally asked, suspicious, "Why help me? What do you want?" Ademide's throat tightened. He hadn't planned to confess, but the truth slipped out raw. "Because someone should have helped my mother once. And no one did." For a moment, Ifunanya's gaze held his, searching his face as if weighing the sincerity of his words. "And if I refuse?" she challenged. "Then I walk away," he answered simply. "But at least I'll leave knowing I tried." The boy's cough struck again, violent, wrenching his small body. Ifunanya's resolve wavered, her shoulders sagging under the weight of exhaustion. Pride battled desperation in her eyes, and lost. "Where?" she asked, barely audible. "A service department," he said gently. 2 blocks away. The door stays open. You can leave at sunrise if you want." Her lips trembled, her hesitation heavy. But when Chisholm shuddered in her arms, she finally whispered, "Okay." Ademide nodded once, sealing the silent agreement. "Come." The walk across the slick street was wordless. He kept a careful distance, watching the shadows where danger could hide. Ifunanya's sandals slapped against the puddles, each step a mixture of defiance and surrender. The Maybach's driver opened the rear door, glancing curiously at the drenched woman and child. One look from Ademide silenced any question. Ifunanya paused, eyeing the car's sleek interior with suspicion. "This is too much," she murmured. "It's just dry," he said softly. "That's all that matters tonight." Inside, the leather smelled of polish and faint citrus. Chisholm's wide eyes roamed in awe, but his coughing didn't stop. Ifunanya held him close, staring out the rain-blurred window, her body tense, her pride still coiled like a shield. Ademide sat beside her, not close but steady, letting his presence be felt without pressing in. The silence was fragile, almost a truce. Then it broke. Chisholm coughed violently, his tiny frame shaking with the effort. Ifunanya tried to steady him, but her own exhaustion finally betrayed her. Her arms slackened, her body swayed. Ademide reached across instinctively, one arm catching mother and child before they could collapse. The rain outside blurred into white sheets, the world collapsing into breath and touch, a cliffhanger of need and unanswered questions. The Maybach eased to a stop outside a discreet tower block in Victoria Island, one of those quiet service departments where glass met warm wood and security guards knew when not to ask questions. The rain followed them in, dripping from their clothes, pulling on polished marble floors. Ifunanya hesitated in the lobby, clutching Chisholm close, her eyes scanning the art on the walls, abstract canvases worth more than she had seen in a year, before stepping into the lift. It moved silently, too smooth, too foreign. By the time the doors opened on the top floor, her sandals had begun to squeak against the tiles, a reminder of how far her world was from his. The apartment door swung open with the softest of coated locks. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. Glass walls framed the skyline, rain sliding down in silver ribbons. The air smelled faintly of cedar and something warmer, a cologne clinging to the space. A soft jazz record hummed from hidden speakers, the kind of music that filled silence without intruding. For a moment, Ifunanya simply stood, dripping water onto his parquet floors, trying to reconcile the contrasts before her. A kitchen with marble counters and chrome fixtures stood in quiet defiance of her scuffed sandals and frayed shawl. A pantry lined with neatly stacked cereals and canned goods, none of them cheap, sat untouched, the kind of food kept not for hunger but for display. And in the corner, an untouched wine fridge glowed like temptation. Her suspicion deepened. Men with this kind of life did not stop for strangers in the rain. Yet here he was, hanging his Tom Ford jacket over a chair as if he had all the time in the world. "Sit," he said, not commanding, but offering. She didn't. She chose a spot near the couch, setting Chisholm down gently. The boy's eyelids drooped heavily, his cough softening into hiccups. Ademide moved into the kitchen, rolled up his sleeves, and reached for a pack of Indomie noodles and 2 eggs. The action startled her. She had expected servants, a call to some unseen hand to prepare trays of imported food. Instead, he cracked eggs with casual familiarity, whisking them into the sizzling noodles. "You cook?" she asked, suspicion edging into her tone. "Enough to stay alive," he replied. "Or enough to lie that I tried." The corner of her mouth threatened to curve into a smile but never quite did. She was too tired, too guarded. When he set the steaming bowls on the counter, she shook her head. "You didn't need to. You didn't need to stand in the rain either," he said, sliding one bowl in her direction. "But you did." Her hunger betrayed her hesitation. She ate in silence, each bite tentative at first, then urgent once her body remembered it had been hours since her last proper meal. He didn't watch her, he ate his own, quiet, unbothered by her pace. When the food was gone and Chisholm had finally drifted into a heavy sleep on the couch, Ademide leaned back against the counter. His voice was careful, measured. "You don't owe me anything," he said. "Tonight, you and your boy are safe. Nothing more. Nothing less." Her eyes narrowed. "Safe usually has a price." "Not here," he said simply. He reached for a slim control panel on the wall and tapped in a few numbers. "These are the codes for the doors. They're yours while you stay. Lock them as you wish." She blinked, startled. He had just handed her the very autonomy men like him usually stole. "If you want the guest room, it's yours," he continued. "If not, you decide where you rest." She exhaled slowly, suspicion wrestling with fatigue. "The couch," she said finally, settling down beside Chisholm. "Then the couch," he agreed. As he moved to tidy the kitchen, her gaze wandered the apartment. On a low shelf near the window, something unusual caught her eye. Children's storybooks. Bright covers, fairy tales, picture books, dozens of them, carefully arranged. She frowned. "You have children?" she asked cautiously. He followed her eyes, then shook his head. "No." A pause. "My mother used to buy books for children in hospitals. I buy them too sometimes. Just in case." The words lingered in the air, fragile. Ifunanya didn't press. Instead, she adjusted Chisholm's blanket, her body curling protectively around him. As the generator's low hum steadied the night, she finally whispered, "Thank you." She didn't use his name, she still didn't know it, but her voice carried sincerity heavy enough to bridge their worlds for a moment. He gave a small nod, as though receiving a gift he hadn't expected. For a while, the apartment was nothing but silence, broken only by the rain's insistence on the glass. Gratitude sat quietly beside dignity, neither overpowering the other. Then, on the console table, his phone lit up. The screen glowed against the shadows, its message a reminder that their fragile cocoon was temporary. "Where are you, Mead?" The board asks tomorrow. He stared at the words for a long second, his jaw tightening, then turned the phone face down without answering. The apartment held its breath again. Morning in Banin came not quietly but with its usual riot of sounds and scents. The faint smoke of House Asuya still lingered in the air from the night cellars, blending with the exhaust of Danfo's already honking for passengers. The bridges over Victoria Island shimmered in early light, traffic already crawling with the determination of ants. Lagos, or Banin, as locals called it when they wanted to separate the city's post from its polished brochures, was alive again, unapologetic about its noise. Inside the glass tower, the world felt far removed. The rain had ended, leaving the sky washed pale. In the kitchen, Ifunanya boiled water in a steel kettle, her movements neat and purposeful. She had found a small tin of tea in the pantry, tucked between imported coffee beans and boxes of cereal. She poured hot water into 2 cups, her worn fingers brushing the glossy marble counter as though the stone might reject her touch. When she reached for a spoon, her eyes fell on something small but striking, a pair of cufflinks, left on the counter beside a folded tie. Silver, understated, but engraved with the letters AA. She froze. Her eyes lingered on them longer than necessary. Ademide Akanji. She didn't know his full name yet, but she recognized initials that spoke of legacy. They were not the kind of letters poor men carried. Behind her, a burst of laughter pulled her attention. Chisholm had discovered a small electric train set in the corner of the living room. The track circled in a perfect oval, its tiny engine buzzing faithfully until one wheel snagged. "Uncle M," the boy called, already using the affectionate upgrade. "It's stuck." Ademide walked over, crouching in his white shirt and rolled-up sleeves. He carefully lifted the train, adjusting the wheel with the precision of someone who understood fragile things. He set it back down, his large hands surprisingly gentle, waiting until the train completed a full loop. "There," he said softly. "Good as new." Chisholm clapped in delight, his cough momentarily forgotten. Ifunanya watched the scene, her suspicion warring with a reluctant warmth. This man, with his Maybach and his marble counters, did not carry himself like the cold men she had encountered before. But that only deepened the riddle. "You do this often?" she asked quietly, placing the tea on the table. "What?" He glanced up. "Fixing trains. Sitting on the floor with children." A smile tugged at his lips. "Not often enough." He rose, dusting his trousers. "What exactly do you do?" she pressed. The question hung heavy. He could have said heir to Akanji Holdings, the empire of steel, finance, and energy that stretched from Lekki Free Trade Zone to Abuja's corridors of power. He could have said Billionaire's son, the name whispered in boardrooms. Instead, he gave the half-truth he had practiced. "Operations," he said. "Some projects, some logistics." Her eyes narrowed. "Operations for what?" He shrugged. "For whoever needs things to move quietly from one place to another." She tilted her head, unconvinced but too tired to press. Her pride refused to beg for answers. Instead, he changed the subject. "You said last night you needed work. I know a place, a cafe I co-own," quietly. "Nothing glamorous. Just honest pay." Her spine straightened immediately. "I don't take charity." "It isn't charity," he said firmly. "It's an introduction. You'll answer to the manager, not me. No special treatment." For a long second, she weighed him. Then she nodded once, slowly. "Opportunity," she said, correcting him. "Not favor." "Opportunity," he agreed. He reached for his phone and dialed. "Bisola," he said when the line clicked. "Yes. Someone's coming in today. She's hardworking. Treat her like every other staff. Pay her like every other staff. No exceptions." Ifunanya caught his gaze. He didn't look away. It was the first time she allowed herself to believe him. Outside, Banin's footage of survival unfolded in relentless rhythm. Bus queues stretched like wounded snakes. Hawkers darted between traffic with trays balanced on their heads, ground nuts, bottled water, plantain chips. The air thickened with humidity, the rush of millions carrying lives heavier than their wallets. Ifunanya sipped her tea, watching the city below through the floor-to-ceiling glass. From up here, it looked like a painting. But she knew the heat, the noise, the danger. She had lived inside that painting all her life. "Your world looks different from above," she murmured. Ademide followed her gaze. "So does yours, I imagine." She didn't reply. The kettle clicked off automatically. The jazz record had ended, leaving silence that pressed against the walls. For a moment, it felt as though they stood on the edge of two cliffs, staring across at each other, wondering if the bridge could hold. Then a sound broke it. His phone buzzed violently on the counter. A notification glowed across the screen, a headline from a finance blog. Ademide reached for it, but not before Ifunanya's sharp eyes caught the words. Who was the mystery woman and child? Akanji spotted leaving gala in Maybach, helping unknowns in Oshodi. The photo beneath it was grainy but damning, a long lens shot of Ademide in his suit, bending toward Ifunanya and Chisholm under the kiosk roof, rain blurring the background but not enough to hide the truth. Ifunanya's breath caught. Ademide turned the phone face down, his jaw tightening. Ignore it, he muttered. But the silence that followed told her this was no small noise. This was the beginning of something louder, something dangerous. And for the first time, she wondered if stepping into his world had already marked her. The cafe was alive before the sun. By 6 a.m., the shutters rolled up and the smell of ground beans filled the corner of Adeola Odiko like an anthem to the restless city. Ifunanya tied her apron with quick hands, her hair pulled back, ready for whatever the day threw. She had started as the earliest of early shift dishwashers, scouring trays, stacking cups, wiping down chrome counters until they shone like mirrors. But Bisola, the manager, believed in trial by fire. Within a week, Ifunanya had learned the hiss of the espresso machine, the delicate temper of croissants that burned if you blinked too long, and the rhythm of the POS terminal when impatient bankers tapped their feet. Her wrists ached at the end of every shift, her back screamed, but her pride remained intact. For once, she was not taking. She was earning. At the corner table, Chisholm sat with his ever-growing collection of pencils and paper scraps Bisola allowed him to use. While the cafe bustled around him, he drew skyscrapers, tall, impossible towers that leaned toward the sky with roofs like crowns. Each sketch looked less like buildings and more like hope, his way of imagining a future higher than the one his mother carried on her shoulders. Bisola noticed everything. Her brows were always furrowed, her tone brisk, but her fairness balanced her strictness. Ifunanya, steam wand too hot, she barked once. You scorch milk again, customers drink bitterness. Yes, ma, Ifunanya replied quickly, adjusting. Good. Now smile small. People pay for coffee and comfort. Ifunanya smiled, awkward, but genuine. The woman nodded approvingly. By mid-morning, the cafe thronged with bankers in navy suits, interns glued to laptops, and couples arguing quietly over pastries. Through it all, Ifunanya found she thrived on the pace. Chaos could be survival, but here, chaos came with structure. There were rules, orders, and receipts. It gave her a strange kind of peace. Sometimes, in the middle of a shift, a familiar figure drifted in. Ademide never lingered long. He wore no suit, only shirts rolled at the sleeves, his presence downplayed, almost invisible. He'd murmur about checking power issues, glance once at the generator controls, and leave without drawing attention. But not without leaving something behind, his tips, folded discreetly into the staff pool jar. The staff noticed, though. They whispered when his back was turned. Oga fine one of the baristas giggled. But see that is old money quiet. He no day make noise like lecky boys. Not true, another replied. That one carry him mama's kind eyes. No be today money. Ifunanya heard the gossip but said nothing. She worked, scrubbed, poured, balanced trays. Still, her phone buzzed in her apron pocket, dragging her back to reality. A message from her landlord, new deposit by Friday or out. No excuses this time. Her throat tightened. Rent had become a deadline that stalked her every step. She slipped the phone away, pressing the worry down where no one could see it. Pride could not pay, but neither could panic. That evening, when the rush slowed, Chisholm shuffled up to Ademide shyly, clutching a sheet of paper. Uncle M, he said, holding it out. Ademide crouched to his level. The drawing was simple, 3 stick figures holding hands, one tall, one medium, one small with an oversized smile. Above them, a sun with sharp rays shone down, and a crooked line spelled, in blocky letters, family. Ademide stared at it longer than he expected. Something in his chest shifted. Carefully, he folded the paper and slid it into his wallet. Inside was a photo of his late mother, faded from years of being handled. The drawing went beside it, as though both belonged in the same sacred place. Thank you, Chisholm, he said softly. I'll keep it. The boy grinned, then darted back to his corner, leaving Ademide standing there with a weight in his hand that felt heavier than any deal he had ever signed. Even Ifunanya noticed his silence. She said nothing, but her eyes softened when they met his across the counter. Gratitude flickered there, tangled with dignity, still unbroken. Outside, the city moved as it always did. But that day, something else moved toward them too. Late afternoon brought a different kind of presence. A glossy black SUV rolled to a stop outside the cafe, its windows tinted, its paint gleaming like liquid shadow. Conversation stilled as customers glanced out the glass front. The driver stepped out first, crisp in uniform. Then the back door opened, and a woman emerged. Ifunanya Akanji. Her heels clicked like punctuation as she crossed the pavement. Her eyes were razor sharp, her blouse silk, her presence undeniable. Where Ademide tried to fade, Ifunanya filled every room she entered. Through the glass, her gaze swept the cafe in one deliberate scan, landing on Ifunanya behind the counter, then on Chisholm sketching his towers, and finally on her brother, half hidden near the shelves of pastry. The door swung open with a soft chime. Ifunanya stepped in, carrying the kind of energy that made silence stretch, the kind that always meant something was about to change. The cafe door chimed, and silence followed her in. Ifunanya Akanji had that effect. Where Ademide slipped quietly through rooms, his elder sister entered like a headline in motion. Her heels tapped against the floor with surgical precision, her silk blouse catching the cafe's low light, her eyes sweeping across the space as though scanning a balance sheet. And that was how she read rooms, like numbers on a ledger. In one glance, she clocked Ifunanya's calloused hands, damp from wiping counters, her apron tied neat but faded from use. She noted the protective tilt of her shoulders toward the little boy sketching in the corner, the way her gaze flicked from strangers to exits as if safety were always a calculation. Then she shifted to Ademide, standing half in shadow near the pastry shelf, pretending to rearrange croissants he had no business touching. Ifunya's mouth curved, equal parts amusement and warning. Hiding hearts in cafes now, little brother? She teased, her voice smooth enough to draw attention without effort. Ifunanya stiffened, bristling at the insinuation. She straightened, her pride braced like armor. We're working, she said curtly, not raising her voice but making her boundaries clear. Ifunya's eyes softened, not with pity, but with recognition. She knew a fighter when she saw one. She stepped closer, letting her tone shift from playful to curious. And who was this? She asked, bending slightly toward the boy. Chisholm, he answered before his mother could stop him, pencil still clutched in his hand. Ifunanya crouched at his level, her expensive perfume drifting like a secret. That's a fine skyscraper you're drawing, she said warmly. Do you plan to build them one day? Chisholm nodded seriously. I'll build houses where people are safe, he said. Ifunanya blinked, caught off guard by the weight of his words. She looked back at Ifunanya, who met her gaze steadily. For a moment, something passed between them, two women reading each other without words. Pride recognized pride. I like him, Ifunanya said softly, standing. Does he go to school nearby? Ifunanya hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Not now, she said finally. Things have been unsettled. Ifunanya only nodded, her eyes kind but unreadable. Then, with the ease of someone used to building bridges, she extended an invitation. My foundation is hosting a children's art fair this weekend. Stalls, paints, laughter, nothing more. You should come. No strings attached. Ifunanya's lips pressed into a polite smile, her refusal already decided. Thank you, but we wouldn't fit in. Ademide, watching quietly, said nothing. He knew better than to push. Ifunanya tilted her head, studying her brother. You've changed, she said to him. Not your clothes. Not your face. Something else. Her voice lowered, just enough for Ifunanya to pretend she hadn't heard. Does father know? Ademide's jaw tightened. No. Ifunya's eyes glinted. Then he will soon. Mergers are circling. Headlines don't stay quiet in Banin. And you know as well as I do, discretion dies faster than truth in this city. Her words carried a warning, not just to her brother but to the woman beside him. Ifunanya kept her face calm, but the name father snagged in her mind. She had heard enough whispers during her shifts to know this was not the language of ordinary siblings. She dried her hands slowly on her apron, letting the suspicion settle. Ifunanya finished her coffee with elegance, left a tip that could have fed a family for a week, and kissed her brother lightly on the cheek. Be careful, Mead, she murmured. You're walking lines you don't fully see. Then she left, her SUV swallowing her as smoothly as she had arrived. The cafe's hum returned gradually. Customers resumed their conversations, staff returned to their routines. But Ifunanya's mind did not. That evening, long after closing, she sat with her phone in her lap. Chisholm was asleep on her shoulder, his pencil still tucked behind his ear. The cafe lights dimmed as Bisola locked the doors, leaving only the glow of her screen. Her fingers hesitated before typing. Akanji. She paired it with the letter she had seen on the cufflinks. The search engine filled in the rest before she could. Akanji Holdings. Her thumb hovered, then pressed. The results spilled across the screen like an avalanche. Akanji Holdings, a multinational giant in steel, energy, and finance. Chief Tunda Akanji, Chairman. Articles with words like Billionaire, Heir, Dynasty, Board influence. Photos of glossy towers with tinted glass, oil rigs stretching into the horizon, suits shaking hands at state dinners. And there, one photo that made her breath catch. A family portrait, taken years ago. Chief Tunda, stern but powerful. Beside him, a younger Ademide, in the same kind of crisp suit he wore now, expression unreadable but unmistakably the man who had pulled her from the rain. Ifunanya's chest tightened. Her world tilted. She locked the phone quickly, pressing it to her chest as though it had burned her. The truth was too sharp, too bright, too dangerous. For the first time since stepping into his Maybach, she felt truly afraid, not of him, but of the storm that came with his name. The cafe had emptied out, its hum reduced to the whir of a ceiling fan and the scrape of chairs stacked for the night. Ifunanya wiped down the counter one last time, her movement steady but her mind storming. Chisholm slept curled on a bench in the corner, pencil still in his hand, his small chest rising and falling unevenly. When she turned, Ademide was there, leaning against the glass wall, hands in his pockets, watching her with the same quiet intensity he always carried. He had stopped pretending to check generator wires. This time, he was simply waiting. She set the rag down, drew in a breath, and asked the question that had been clawing at her since Funka's visit. "You're that Akanji?" Her voice was steady, but her eyes burned. Ademide didn't flinch. He held her gaze, then nodded once, gently. "Yes." Silence pressed between them. Ifunanya folded her arms, not in defiance, but in self-preservation. "Do you know what it feels like to be poor in this city? Pride is the only thing you have left. It's currency. It's how you buy dignity when money can't." He exhaled slowly, his shoulders heavy with the truth he had avoided. "My mother hated the weight of that name," he said. "She wanted privacy. She wanted to be known for who she was, not what she married into. Maybe that's why I hide too. I didn't want you to see me through headlines before you saw me as a man." Her eyes softened, just for a moment. "I assumed the worst," she admitted. "That you were another rich man with an appetite for saving damsels, then discarding them. And I assumed hiding the truth would protect us," he said. "That was wrong. I'm sorry." Her lips curved into something bittersweet. "We're both sorry then." For the first time, the tension between them shifted. The air carried something fragile, an honesty too delicate to name. Ademide moved closer, keeping his voice low. "I can't promise to shield you from the tabloids. They'll write what they want. They always do. And I can't promise my father won't try to measure you against boardrooms and banquets. And I can't promise to fit into those rooms," she said, her tone firm but not defensive. "I can't perform wealth. I don't own the right clothes. I don't speak their coded language. I can only be me. That's all I want," he said, almost whispering. "Honest days. With you. With him." His eyes flicked toward Chisholm, sleeping restlessly in the corner. Ifunanya let the word sit in the air. Honest days sounded like luxury to her, luxury not of money, but of peace. She swallowed hard. "Honest days start with rent due Friday," she said quietly. He gave a short laugh, not mocking, but in recognition of her bluntness. "Fair. But the cafe has a staff stipend, childcare support. It's policy, not charity. You qualify." Her eyes narrowed. "Policy?" "Yes," he said firmly. "Ask Bisola. It's in the handbook. I just never told you because I didn't want you to think I invented it for you." She studied him, weighing every word. Slowly, her shoulders eased. "Policy, then," she said. "Policy," he repeated, relief flickering across his face. For a brief moment, there was calm. The city outside kept moving, horns blaring, hawkers shouting, the familiar rhythm of Banin's endless struggle. But inside the cafe, it felt like they had carved out a fragile truce. Then Chisholm stirred. At first, it was a soft cough, the kind Ifunanya had grown used to. But the sound deepened, scraping his small chest, each breath rattling. She rushed to him, pressing her palm to his forehead. Heat. Fierce, rising heat. Her heart lurched. Mead, she whispered urgently, her pride vanishing under the weight of fear. He's burning. Ademide was already moving, crouching beside her, his hand hovering near Chisholm's hair. He didn't touch, not wanting to intrude, but his eyes tightened as he saw the fever flush across the boy's cheeks. Not tonight, Ifunanya murmured, as though she could bargain with fate. Her hands trembled, adjusting the thin blanket, desperate to cool him down. Ademide reached for his phone, his voice steady but urgent. We'll take him to the clinic. Now. Ifunanya's eyes darted to the door, to the city outside, to the weight of his surname she had only just begun to grasp. The truth had cost her pride already, now it threatened to cost her son's health. She swallowed hard, clutching Chisholm to her chest, and nodded. The night that had begun with honesty was ending with fear. And as they hurried out into the thick Banin air, the city seemed to know that whatever lines they had drawn were about to be tested by fire. The night air was heavy as they hurried into the car. The Maybach cut through puddled streets like a silver blade, its engine silent but urgent. Rain still clung to the windows, streaking the city lights into blurred trails of red and white. Ifunanya held Chisholm close, whispering words meant more for her own courage than his comfort. His skin was hot against her chest, his breath shallow and uneven. Every cough shook his small frame, each one like a stone dropping into her gut. The private clinic was tucked behind a tall gate on Victoria Island, its white walls glowing faintly under floodlights. Inside, the waiting room smelled of sanitizer and rain-soaked clothes, a cold, sterile scent that made Ifunanya's stomach twist. Plastic chairs lined the walls, a television flickered silently above, its caption showing yet another panel on oil mergers. At the front desk, the nurse tapped briskly on a keyboard, her expression bored but her voice sharp. Deposit before consultation. 200,000 minimum. Ifunanya stiffened. Her hands tightened around Chisholm instinctively, as though the child could be shielded from bureaucracy. The number might as well have been 2 billion. Before she could open her mouth, Ademide stepped forward. Ademide Akanji, he said quietly, sliding his card across the counter. The nurse's fingers froze mid-keystroke. Her eyes darted up, recognition flickering instantly. Systems shifted, the atmosphere tilted. Papers were stamped, receipts printed, doors opened wider, faster. The name punched through resistance like a master key. Ifunanya's throat ached. She hated this, the dependency, the humiliation of needing what she could not give. And yet, when Chisholm's fevered breathing eased slightly under the doctor's first touch, she also loved it, loved that her son would be treated, that survival did not have to be a gamble tonight. The doctor, a middle-aged man with gentle hands and tired eyes, examined Chisholm carefully. After what felt like years compressed into minutes, he finally looked up. Viral infection, he said. Not severe, but it needs monitoring. We'll keep him overnight. Nebulizer for the cough, inhaler for home, and rest. He'll be fine. Ifunanya exhaled so hard her chest ached. Fine. The word felt like water after thirst. They moved into a small private ward. Chisholm slept under a thin blanket, the rise and fall of his chest steadier now, the hum of medical machines soft like a lullaby. Ademide sat in a chair beside the bed, his tall frame awkwardly folded, his head tilted back against the wall. He didn't lie down, he didn't leave. At some point, sleep claimed him, but it was the kind of light, restless sleep of a man unwilling to let go of vigilance. Ifunanya sat across, her eyes tracing him in the dim light. She saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hands remained half-curled, as though still braced for bad news. She saw him not as heir, not as Akanji, but as a man carrying something heavier than wealth. In the deep of night, when silence pressed hardest, his voice broke through, quiet and cracked. My mother died in a clinic not much different from this. Ifunanya looked up sharply. She had an illness they called minor, he continued, eyes still closed. But the generator failed during treatment. The power cut. Machines stopped. By the time they restarted, it was too late. Something preventable. Something that shouldn't have been the end of her story. His throat worked. Since then, I promised myself, if I ever saw it again, I would not let someone I love suffer because of systems that don't care. Silence lingered after his words. Ifunanya's hand brushed over her son's hair. Her voice was steady, but it carried the weight of her whole life. Chisholm will not suffer for poverty. Not while I still breathe. Their eyes met across the dim room. His promise, her vow, 2 different paths, meeting in the same fragile moment of resolve. The night deepened. The city outside never fully slept, but here, time seemed suspended. The sound of Chisholm's soft breathing became everything. Then it came, the intrusion. A soft click. Barely audible, but sharp enough to slice through the stillness. Ifunanya's head jerked toward the door. Through the glass pane, she saw it, a shadow retreating, camera still in hand. Someone had taken a photo. Her chest tightened. She looked at Ademide, whose eyes were now open, already hard with recognition. He didn't move immediately, only exhaled slowly, as though bracing himself. The world outside had found them. By morning, Banin already knew. Phones buzzed before dawn, cafe radios whispered the same story, and news blogs shouted the headline that refused to be contained. Akanji Science secret family? Photos surface of Mead with mystery woman and child. The image was grainy, shot through the clinic's glass door, but unmistakable. Ademide bent protectively toward Ifunanya and Chisholm, the fluorescent light painting them in intimacy tabloids would feast on. The caption did the rest. Is this the future the Akanji dynasty hides? At the Akanji Holdings headquarters, the board's fury simmered behind glass walls and leather chairs. Men in tailored suits whispered about scandal, investors, mergers at risk. And at the center of it, Chief Tunda Akanji demanded a single thing, a conversation with his son. The message reached Ademide before the coffee in the cafe had cooled. Ifunanya saw the headline first on a customer's phone, the screen tilted too close to ignore. Her throat locked. She wanted to vanish, to fold herself and Chisholm into invisibility. She gathered her bag quickly, whispering to her son. But Ademide stepped into her path. His voice was low, steady. Don't disappear. Her eyes flashed. Disappearing is survival. Being seen, he countered, is power. Don't let them rewrite you. Before she could argue, the cafe door swung open and Funka appeared, sharp as ever but softened by urgency. She waved her driver inside. Come. Now. Before they make a circus. Ifunanya hesitated. Pride screamed at her to resist, but Chisholm's small cough decided for her. She followed. The car wound through Banin, away from the noise, slipping into a quieter part of town. They stopped at a modest flat, a two-bedroom tucked behind a faded gate, its paint chipped but its air calm. Funka handed Ifunanya the keys. He owns this place. Almost no one knows. You'll be safer here. Ifunanya looked around, simple tiled floors, curtains that didn't match, a fridge humming quietly in the corner. It was no tower of glass, but it breathed differently. Real, lived in, human. Thank you, she murmured, though it tasted like swallowing stone. Meanwhile, the city froth thickened. Social media chewed on the photos with sharp teeth. Some gossiped about the mystery single mother. Others accused her of trapping a billionaire heir. Memes sprang overnight, hashtags multiplied, commentary grew vicious. At the cafe, staff closed ranks. They served lattes with tight smiles, deflecting nosy customers who pried for gossip. One customer leaned too far into questions about Ifunanya's whereabouts. Bisola's glare shut him down before Ifunanya's name even left his lips. The staff said nothing, silenced their shield, loyalty their quiet rebellion. Through it all, Ademide didn't hide. He walked into rooms where investors raised eyebrows, where journalists flung questions, where his father's men whispered strategy. And every time, he took the weight. Yes, the woman is with me. Yes, the child matters. No, I will not disavow them. Ifunanya heard the ripples secondhand, whispers in cafe corners, murmurs through texts Funka forwarded discreetly. At first, she dismissed it as rich man's rhetoric. But the more she listened, the more she realized, he wasn't shielding her in private. He was choosing her in rooms she would never even be allowed to enter. It frightened her. And it moved her. One evening in the quiet flat, she watched him help Chisholm assemble a jigsaw puzzle on the floor. His tie was loosened, his shirt sleeves rolled. His phone buzzed relentlessly on the table, ignored. Chisholm laughed when a piece finally clicked into place. Ifunanya sat back on the couch, the sound warming her in ways she couldn't articulate. She whispered, almost to herself, "You're not like them, are you?" Ademide looked up. "I am them," he said honestly. "But I don't want to be only them." The words stayed with her long after silence returned. But silence never lasted long. Late that night, as rain tapped gently against the flat's windows, a black car rolled up to the gate. A driver in a Akanji livery stepped out, delivering an envelope sealed in wax. Inside, the letter was crisp, the handwriting unmistakably his father's. Ademide. Dinner tomorrow at the family house. Come alone. Ifunanya read it once, her fingers trembling. Alone. The word was both command and warning. She looked at him, her voice unsteady. What will you do? Ademide folded the letter carefully, his expression unreadable. What I must. The night grew heavier. The invitation wasn't a meal. It was a summons. The Akanji Holdings office in Ikoyi smelled of power, polished teak, leather, and the faint musk of old cigars sealed into wood. Floor-to-ceiling windows stared down at the lagoon, where barges and speedboats shared restless waters. Every inch of the room was curated, framed photographs of handshakes with governors, contracts sealed in gold frames, plaques from global partners. And at the far end, behind a desk carved from a single slab of mahogany, sat Chief Tunda Akanji. His suit was dark, his tie crisp, his gaze sharp enough to cut. Opposite him, in the polished glow of the office, sat an empty chair. It had been untouched for years. That was where Ademide's mother used to sit, her laughter softening even the hardest meetings, her hand sometimes squeezing her son's when the room grew too sharp. The chair remained as she left it, a silent monument of grief Chief never acknowledged aloud. Ademide noticed it every time. Tonight, it felt heavier than ever. Chief's voice broke the silence. Do you know what you've done? Ademide didn't flinch. I've kept a woman and her child safe. Chief's hands tightened on the desk. You've jeopardized a merger worth billions. Do you think foreign investors read tabloids for entertainment? They read them for blood. And what they see now is weakness. They see scandal. They see you dragging the Akanji name through gutter optics. Ademide leaned forward. They're not optics, father. They're people. Real people. Chief's eyes narrowed. People don't build empires. People consume them. Perceptions build empires. And you've allowed yours to be compromised. Then maybe the empire needs to remember what it was built for, Ademide shot back. You talk about leverage, balance sheets, mergers. You forget that somewhere between the figures are lives. Love is not a transaction. Not everything can be bought or sold. The words landed like stones in water, rippling across the teak desk. Chief's jaw worked, anger and something softer warring behind his stern eyes. You think marriage is not a transaction? Ask your grandfather. Ask your uncles. Every union that built this family was strategy first, sentiment second. That's how we survived 3 recessions and 2 governments that wanted us broken. Ademide's voice was steady, though the weight of history pressed on him. And where did it leave you, father? With a chair you can't bring yourself to move. The silence that followed was not businesslike. It was grief, raw and exposed. Chief's gaze flicked to the chair, lingered there for a long moment, then returned to his son. His voice cracked, but only slightly. She was the one thing I didn't arrange, he admitted quietly. The one choice I made without a ledger. And losing her nearly broke me. Ademide swallowed hard. Then you understand. I won't trade dignity for convenience. Not hers, not his. He nodded toward the empty chair, a gesture toward the mother they both still carried. Chief sat back, studying him. The anger had cooled, leaving calculation tinged with reluctant respect. This woman, Chief said finally, is she honorable? Ademide's eyes didn't waver. She is the most honorable person I've ever known. Chief's brows furrowed. He didn't bless the union, didn't forbid it either. His silence was permission of a kind, but permission laced with warning. When the noise dies, Chief said slowly, bring the boy to me. I will see him with my own eyes. Ademide exhaled, the words not victory but a fragile bridge. Father and son sat in silence, the city lights flickering against glass, the empty chair between them like a ghost still presiding over their lives. The meeting ended not with agreement, but with a pause, a fragile ceasefire in a war of visions. Ademide walked out of the Ikoyi office into the humid night air, his phone vibrating with alerts. He ignored them until one headline refused to be unseen. A rival conglomerate, Okonkwo Group, had leaked a story to the press. Who was Ifunanya? Sources allege former domestic staff with questionable history now tied to Akanji heir. The article was cruel, twisting fragments of her past employer into scandal, painting survival jobs as shame, reducing her dignity into whispers meant to wound. Ademide's fist tightened around the phone. His father's warnings about perception now glared like prophecy. And in a modest flat across town, Ifunanya stared at the same headline, her hands trembling, wondering if truth was about to cost her everything all over again. The flat's fan whirred above, pushing warm air in lazy circles. Outside, Banin's horns blared like restless brass, the city never pausing, never forgiving. Inside, Ifunanya sat with her phone trembling in her palm, her eyes fixed on the words that reduced her to scandal. Former domestic staff. Questionable history. Mystery woman drags Akanji heir into gutter optics. The rival conglomerate's blog post had spread like wildfire. Screenshots, captions, whispers, each more venomous than the last. Her years of survival, washing floors, scrubbing kitchens, babysitting strangers' children, were twisted into shame. What had been honest work was now dressed as opportunism. She closed her eyes, brow rising. In Banin, people didn't care for truth. They cared for spectacle. The phone buzzed again. A text from her landlord, blunt and merciless, last warning. Deposit by Friday or flat goes to another. Market is hot. Her chest tightened. Rent was not theory. Rent was not rumor. Rent was reality, and reality could not be ignored. Across the small living room, Chisholm was sprawled on the floor, crayons scattered, drawing another tower. His fever had eased, but his cough lingered, sharp and exhausting. He drew silently, head bent, the seriousness of his little face too heavy for a child. Ifunanya rose, crossed to the sink, and splashed cold water on her face. Pride had been her shield her whole life. But pride couldn't pay for medicine. Pride couldn't silence tabloids. Pride couldn't hold a roof over her son. The door creaked. Ademide stepped in, jacket draped over one arm, fatigue etched into his frame. She didn't turn, didn't want him to see the tears clinging to her lashes. "They're saying things," she said flatly, voice low but trembling. "Things I can't stop." "I saw," he admitted, setting his jacket down. She spun, her eyes sharp now. "Do you know what it feels like? To scrub floors, to wash plates, to stretch one meal into 2 days, and then have it thrown back at you like filth? To have the only honest things I've ever done turned into shame?" He stepped closer, his voice firm but soft. "I know what it is to have your name twisted until it no longer feels like yours. I grew up with it. But you," he paused, eyes meeting hers with unwavering intensity. "You should never bow to it. You've done nothing dishonorable. Work is work. Dignity is yours." She shook her head, bitterness cracking her tone. "Dignity doesn't pay rent." The words hung heavy. Ademide hesitated, then pulled out an envelope, sliding it across the table. "Staff stipend," he said. "For childcare. Policy, not charity. Use it." Her eyes lingered on the envelope. She wanted to shove it back, to keep her spine unbent. But Chisholm's cough echoed again, and pride faltered against necessity. Slowly, she sat, her hand resting on the envelope but not opening it. "If I take this, it's because of policy. Not because of you." "Policy," he repeated, a faint smile tugging at his lips. The tension loosened a fraction. Later that evening, as Chisholm finally drifted into sleep on the couch, Ifunanya stepped out onto the balcony. The city glimmered, bridge lights stretching like necklaces across the lagoon, Danfo horns a restless chorus below. She gripped the railing, her resolve hardening. She would not disappear. She would not let Banin's gossipers write her story for her. If they called her names, she would stand taller. If they twisted her past, she would own it louder. Behind her, Ademide joined, leaning on the railing. "The storm won't last forever," he said. She glanced at him, her pride still a shield. "Storms never last, but they leave floods. And floods change the ground." His eyes softened. "Then we'll build something stronger on it." She didn't answer, but the silence between them was less hostile now. It was a truce, a fragile alliance forged by necessity and truth. But Banin never let truces rest. The next morning, while she prepared to leave for the cafe, the headline shifted again. A rival blog released another piece, sharper, crueler. "Who was the woman milking Akanji heir? Landlord says rent unpaid for months." Ifunanya's phone buzzed nonstop, messages from old acquaintances, half pitying, half mocking. She ignored them, slipping her phone into her apron, spine straightening. She would walk into that cafe and work as if the world owed her silence. When she entered, staff eyes followed her. But not with judgment. With solidarity. Bisola clapped once. Positions, people. Work no day, wait for gossip. Ifunanya exhaled, grateful. For now, the cafe walls still protected her. But she knew this was only the beginning. The flat smelled of frying oil and laughter. On a humid evening when headlines still buzzed with venom, Ifunanya, Ademide, and Chisholm crowded the small kitchen, their movements clumsy but joyous. Ifunanya dipped yam slices into whisked egg and flour, sizzling them into golden yamarita. Chisholm, perched on a stool, sprinkled peppered chicken with too much seasoning, grinning proudly as the pan hissed in protest. Ademide, sleeves rolled high, wielded a spatula like it was a boardroom pointer. The world outside spun with rumors. Inside, they made a sanctuary. Later, when the food was set on mismatched plates, Chisholm's laughter rang louder than any headline. He tugged at Ademide's sleeve. "Uncle M, you don't eat pepper well." Ademide coughed, eyes watering from a reckless bite. Ifunanya laughed until her side ached. In that moment, the noise of Banin faded, replaced by warmth that money couldn't buy. The next week, the flat's fan sputtered and died. Ademide frowned, tools in hand, crouching like a mechanic in Tom Ford trousers. After a few jolts, the fan whirred reluctantly back to life. Ifunanya clapped. "So the billionaire heir can fix things?" He smirked. "At least the small things." Her turn came at the market. She dragged him into the chaos of Balagun on a Saturday morning, weaving through stalls of pepper, yam, and fabric. Ademide tried to pay full price for tomatoes. Ifunanya snatched the bag back. "No, not in this city." She bargained fast and sharp, cutting prices with the ease of survival. He watched, impressed, humbled. "Teach me that language," he said afterward, arms full of groceries. "You can't buy it," she teased. "You live it." Meanwhile, Chisholm's drawings grew bolder. One evening, Funke brought news. His skyscraper sketch, submitted quietly to a children's art contest, had won a small prize. The certificate was flimsy, the metal plastic, but the boy's grin was pure gold. His towers now bore not just steel lines, but suns above and tiny hearts within. "See?" Chisholm declared, holding his medal high. "Buildings can love too." From that spark came an idea. Around the small dining table, Ifunanya and Ademide scribbled on scraps of paper, a business, tiny but theirs. Mama and meat breakfast box. At dawn, Ifunanya fried puff in batches, the air sweet with yeast and oil. Ademide brewed cold coffee, smoother than city chains charged fortunes for. Together, they wrapped plantain bread and packed the treats into paper boxes stamped with hand-cut logos Chisholm had drawn. They set up near Lekki roundabouts before sunrise. Office workers slowed, curious, then lined up. By the third morning, they sold out before 8:30. Funke, ever the strategist, insisted on refining their image. "Paper, not plastic," she said firmly. "Let it be more than food. Let it be a message." She sourced recycled packaging, branded with a hibiscus design. "Proceeds," she suggested, "would seed a fund for single mothers and sick children, a quiet rebellion against the cruelty of the blogs." Ifunanya hesitated at first, wary of strings. But Funke smiled. "It's not charity. It's strategy. Your story will not be twisted if you write it yourself." Word spread faster than the rumors had. Customers carried boxes into banks, into taxis, into office towers. The food was simple, but the story wrapped inside it tasted richer. One morning, a delivery landed on Chief Ademide Akanji's desk. A mama and meat breakfast box, neatly packed, hibiscus logo glowing on brown paper. His secretary raised a brow, uncertain. Chief waved him off, opened the box, and ate. Slowly. Quietly. Not a smile, but not a rejection either. By the end, only crumbs remained. That evening, Ademide led Ifunanya and Chisholm to a quiet corner of the Akanji estate, a place untouched by boardrooms or headlines, his mother's garden. Hibiscus and bougainvillea framed the stone bench. The air smelled of earth, of memory. He knelt, digging into soft soil with bare hands. Ifunanya watched silently as he planted a small hibiscus sapling, its leaves trembling in the dusk light. "For new beginnings," he said, voice husky. Ifunanya placed her hand over his. "Then let it grow." Chisholm clapped, declaring it their family tree. For a fleeting hour, they were not scandal, not rumor, not dynasty versus dignity. They were simply three souls weaving life together. But Banin never allowed peace to linger. Days later, an envelope arrived at the flat. Heavy cardstock, embossed with gold lettering, the Akanji crest stamped at the top. The RSVP card read, "Family dinner. All three invited." Ifunanya's hands shook as she read it aloud. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a summons. The hibiscus was still new, its roots barely settled. And already, the ground trembled. The night of the dinner carried a hush that felt different from any other evening. Banin's traffic still roared, but inside the modest flat, the preparation was quiet, deliberate. Ifunanya ironed her simplest dress, navy blue, neat but unadorned. Ademide chose a white shirt with sleeves rolled high, no cufflinks, no gilded watch. And Chisholm, wriggling with excitement, wore a clean checked shirt and sandals polished until they shone. There were no stylists, no designer gowns, no flashing cameras. They dressed simply, as themselves. The car that carried them to Okoye moved like a shadow. At the great Akanji house, the gates opened silently, and for the first time, Chief Tunda Akanji himself stood waiting at the door. His presence filled the entryway, not with the sharpness of boardrooms, but with the gravity of a father. Ademide's breath caught when his eyes flicked to the far corner of the dining room. The empty chair, the one that had stood untouched since his mother's passing, was gone. In its place sat a low vase of fresh hibiscus, its red blooms quiet but powerful. The table was set with jollof rice, roasted fish glistening with spice, fried plantain golden and sweet. No imported wines, no silver domes, only the food of memory, the food of home. Dinner began without speeches. Forks clinked against plates, the air heavy with things unsaid. Finally, Ifunanya broke the silence, her voice steady though her hands trembled slightly on her lap. "I need you to hear me, Chief Akanji," she said. "I will never trade my son for access. I don't want boardrooms. I don't want power. I want peace. For him. For us. That is all." Her words hung in the room like incense. Chief's gaze lingered on her, then shifted to Chisholm, who sat upright, proud in his little chair. "And you, young man," Chief said gently, "what do you build with all those drawings?" Chisholm grinned, clutching his crayon-stained fingers. "Houses where people are safe," he declared. "Big houses. With sons. And hearts." Silence followed, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was silence that felt like healing. Chief leaned back, his eyes glinting in the candlelight. "My wife," he said slowly, "would have liked you." The room softened. Funka, seated beside Ifunanya, reached over and squeezed her hand, a gesture of solidarity that words couldn't match. The rest of dinner flowed more gently. The fish was passed, laughter cracked the stiffness when Chisholm spilled a little pepper sauce, and for the first time in years, the Akanji dining table felt less like a battlefield and more like a gathering place. When dessert arrived, simple puff-puff dusted with sugar, the power blinked. The chandelier flickered once, twice, then died completely. The room dropped into darkness. And then, laughter. Not strained, not polite, but real. Ifunanya chuckled softly, Funka burst into a light laugh, and even Chief's deep rumble joined, breaking the formality. Candlelight was brought to the table, their shadows flickering across the walls. For a moment, the mighty Akanji house felt human again. Later, at the door, the night air wrapped them in its thick humidity. Chief stood with his son, his eyes unreadable but no longer cold. He placed a hand on Ademide's shoulder, firm but not heavy. "Bring them back on Sunday," he said quietly. "Let's plant more hibiscus." Ademide froze, breath catching. The words were not command, not compromise. They were invitation. Ifunanya, standing a step behind, caught the faintest smile tugging at Funka's lips. Chisholm yawned, clutching his medal from the art contest as if it were treasure. The night closed around them, but it wasn't the suffocating weight of scandal anymore. It was something lighter, something that smelled faintly of soil after rain, of beginnings not yet written. The table had not been perfect. The future was far from certain. But tonight, they had made a space where dignity and love could breathe together. And in Banin, that was its own quiet victory.